Well, welcome and good evening, everybody. Really good to have you here. But one or two people are still arriving, but we'll make a bit of a start. So, welcome to Living Faith with 5s to 11s, a conference run by Roots and the United Reformed Church Children and Youth Work team. This is the first of what are going to be 3 sessions, focusing on living faith with 5s to 11s, and this evening's session is focusing on living faith with 5s to 11s at home. So I'll just introduce the team. I'm Sam Richards. I'm the head of Children's and Youth Work for the United Reformed Church, and I'm here with my colleagues Lorraine Webb, who's our programme officer, who you'll be seeing a bit more of later, and Trin Kuba, who's doing lots of the behind the scenes work for us tonight. And then we're also delighted to be working with Roots, who this evening are represented by Rosie Nixon and Pam Elliott, both of whom you'll be seeing in different roles as we go through this evening. And then Leo Roberts, one of the our Children and Youth Development Officers, he works for Northwestern Synod, is also going to be part of the panel later. He, as well as that role, he's also a songwriter, musician, and grandfather, which I think is relevant for this evening's focus. And I'm extremely delighted to be introducing our speaker this evening, who's Alison Hulse, who works part-time for the Methodist Church Learning Network as a Learning and Development Officer, and in the other part of her working life writes for Roots. She leads a worship community for young families and supports 2 local toddler groups. But she's also mum to 3 children and lives in Liverpool. And we're delighted to have Alison back because she was one of our speakers last year when we ran a conference in a similar way in the evenings, looking at faith with 0s to 5. So it's lovely to have Alison back with us and to be benefiting from more of her wisdom and experience. So I think people have more or less finished arriving. So I'm just going to open with a brief prayer. Dear God, we gather online, joined in community through technology by your Spirit. We gather to share our passion for children, our desire to serve them and nurture their faith. Thank you for the privilege of knowing and living faith with children in our families, our churches, and our communities. Bless this time we have together. Help us to listen, learn, and grow in love for you and all your children. Amen. So just a reminder that this evening session is being videoed, but it will only be the speakers who are videoed, not you as participants, and the small group times won't be videoed at all. If you're having any technical problems, we suggest you message Trin. You'll find her named in the chat, or you can email the Children and Youth Work email address if you need to. And if you've downloaded the handout, that's really there just to give you something to help you doodle and take notes as we go through this evening. Our encouragement to you really is that you, as we listen to Alison and spend time in small groups, that you really focus in on a particular child or some children that you know, and that you're trying to, we're all trying to apply this learning to actual children rather than just thinking about children in theory. So with that encouragement, we're going to begin this evening by hearing from a child. So I'm delighted to introduce Jayden.
To focus on my work and to listen to other people's ideas if we're doing a group work, because everyone's being quiet and then you can only hear them. I don't really have a specific person I like listening to, but I do listen to this podcast about Bible reading, Daily Audio Bible Kids. I listen to that mostly every day I know before I go to bed. When I'm answering a question or I'm giving feedback or advice to our group in group activities, and when I'm presenting something in front of the class or someone. It kind of makes me feel sad and isolated. Yes, because he answers my prayers. A time when I went to a new school where I live, and I've asked God to protect me and so that I make new friends. And then on that day, I made a new friend, and then he became my best friend. Yes. And his Bible speeches and readings. I would say at church, but another place where you could pray and speak to God is at your house, or even in the car, or anywhere where there's a quiet place you can talk to him. Sometimes I get confused and struggled when there's a difficult question. I mostly ask the teacher or ask my partner or try to do it myself. And then when I do it myself and I can't do it, I'll ask the teacher to help me. One of my favorite ways of learning in church is by Sunday school and also reading Bible speeches. Something I've learned about God is that he's kind and he helps people. And one time in the Bible, there was kids that were running over to God, but then their parents told them to stop. And then so did one of the disciples, and then God told them to let them come. And then he hanged around with Jesus and made them happy. I learned it in school, RE, and I learned it through the podcast, kind of. And by reading Bible speeches. In computer science in my school, we were doing a presentation about cyberbullying, and I did a did you know fact, and I told a lot of people and the teacher, and the teacher didn't know, and so did the younger people. So I taught them something that they didn't know. In church, they asked me to set up the Zoom, and we put on a tripod for those people that are home that can't come to church because they might not want to get COVID or they can't. I use my mum phone to do Zoom, and then we put on a tripod, and then we move her around when the priest is preaching, and when there's a Bible speak, we move it around. Love is a type of way where you show compassion to someone you like or someone related or close to you. My mom, my dad, my sister, my nephew, my grandma, and my granddads. And they care for me and they give me food and support and a place to live, as there's some people out there that don't have love and compassion and they live out the streets. I like to show people that I love them by caring for them and hugging them and showing them compassion and doing good things to not make them disappointed. Because my nephew, he's really young and I love him and I play around with him. And I put him in his car and I drive him, and I love him very much. And with my grandparents, I love them very much, and I eat with them, and I show their compassion. But I don't play with them and ride them in their toy car. Yeah, because in the Bible, it says that God loves everyone. Even when they do something very, very bad, He still loves them and gives them forgiveness so that they could change. Yes, I would describe it by praying to Him every day and asking for forgiveness for the sins that I've done.
It's good to be with you tonight. I'm just going to share my screen. And we're going to explore together tonight what it might look like for the homes of our 5 to 11-year-olds, children like Jaden, to be places where faith grows and is shared and is explored. Let's begin by briefly just unpacking the language a little bit, because it's got a bit confused over the past year. Because for the past few months, we've been leading a lot online that's then taken place in a domestic setting. But on the whole, I want us to see that as church at home tonight. But what we want to talk about is faith at home, where we're talking about the activities and conversations and ideas which nurture faith and are centred in the home environment. Roman Catholic educators call the family the domestic church. It's the safe home where spirituality is formed, practiced, explored, and questioned in a way that can't happen in the wider faith community. And it's a place where the things of the wider faith community are honed and made our own, and we make it our own place and our own spirituality. I think it's important tonight to recognise that it isn't all children who find the home a safe place, and for some children that won't be the case. And not for all children is it that the faith is nurtured in the home. So we just need to hold that tension tonight as we talk. We're going to use this framework for our discussions tonight: listening, learning, and loving. Listening to one another, to God, and to our own experiences. Learning from the Bible, from others, and from our day-to-day lives. And loving. How does all we discover and learn spill out into the world and into our relationships? In his book, Think Orange, Reggie Joyner points out that every church has approximately 40 hours to influence each child in a year. And a parent or carer has approximately 3,000 hours to influence that child. So exploring faith at home with 5 to 11-year-olds fits firmly in that 3,000 hours. But so does a lot of other stuff, like school and sports and music and uniformed groups and play dates and homework and visiting families and lots more. And it's vital that we recognise that this, but that we don't see it as a barrier. Instead, we see it as something that we weave faith through, so it becomes part and parcel of a child's life. When we're talking about a living faith at home, there are two key players, if you like, within that. The first is the child or the children. Now, I currently have one 5 to 11-year-old at home, and they are inquisitive and adventurous, questioning, loving. They've got a huge capacity for wonder. They're discovering. Their feelings are front and centre all the time. And they've got a very holistic way of seeing the world. And one of the defining characteristics of this age group is that they're developing this sense of conscience and right and wrong and justice. And that really frames a lot of what happens for children of this age. And into that, we weave the faith development and spirituality of a 5 to 11-year-old. And at this age, it's huge and it's very varied. So for tonight, I'd like us to simply focus on spirituality being how we are with God. And so a 5 to 11's spirituality and faith at this time is simply their way of being with God and God's way of being with them. Now, I say simply, but actually that makes it very complex because it's different for every child. But it does mean that often in the home environment, that way of being is known and can be best supported because it's the individual child or a couple of children in that environment. The second group then are the parents and significant adults who are in the home. Family life is complex, and the We Are Family research that was updated in 2016 identified 12 different types of family. And if you are a leader in a church context, you'll be working into a number of those different types of family. So that makes it a bit more complicated. And we also need to acknowledge that the wider church has done little up until a few years ago to equip parents and carers in exploring faith at home. And it's only really been recently that across the different denominations, we've started to support faith at home. Ivy Beckwith says that the significant adult's role is to pass on the things of God. And yet, for many of those adults, they find this difficult. For some, they find it terrifying. And for many, they don't know where to start. And Ivy Beckwith goes on to say this: perhaps the best tool we can give parents is to relieve them of the belief that this is rocket science. If we can enable the adults in the home to see that listening and learning with the child might simply mean saying, "I don't know, what do you think? Shall we explore this together?" Then we begin to create an environment at home where everyone can listen to God, can listen to each other, and can learn from their experiences. And the child's living faith can really start to shine through. Let's delve into listening and learning a bit more. It's important and vital to a child's faith to be listened to. Might not look exactly like this, but the child needs to be listened to, not patronised, not told to be quiet, not told to wait a moment. There needs to be a space for them to be listened to. There needs to be spaces created to encourage a child to listen and learn. It might be the physical space, the way a room is set out in a welcoming way. It might be the visual space, visual clues that now's a time for us to explore together. The emotional space, where the things of the day are laid to one side. Or an auditory space, where a child isn't rushed. Places in the home where a child's spirituality is respected. And listening together in the home will mean recognising that, for example, if we're exploring the Bible, we'll all hear and question in different ways, depending on our age, depending on our stage of life, and depending on our stage of faith. And in the home, we need to create an environment where everyone can join in at their own level. But the home is a great place for this. I don't know about you, but if I'm sharing a Bible story at home, it's not likely that at the end of telling the Bible story, I'm going to preach on it. Instead, what I'm going to do is encourage everyone to engage with it in a way that works for them. So they might be talking, they might be thinking, they might be playing, they might be creating, but they're doing what works for them. So that everyone, not just the 5 to 11-year-olds, creates a living faith within the home environment. Learning together might also be about practicing rhythms and establishing rhythms within the family for a child to pray or to explore the Bible or to worship together. And we'll look a little bit more at that later on. But also about creating prompts to notice God in the everyday. Encouraging children to find moments in their general everyday life to pause and listen to God and to others and to learn from those they meet. Not seeing the busyness of their lives as a barrier, but rather seeing it as an opportunity to develop a living faith. As adults, when we talk about our busy lives, very often you'll hear people say things like, well, you could connect with God when you're swimming, or when you're driving the car, or when you're doing the washing up. But what's the equivalent of the washing up and the swimming for a 5 to 11-year-old? What are those moments when actually we can be encouraging them to see as moments and opportunities to connect with God? It's also important to recognise that for a 5 to 11-year-old, a lot of their time, their home lifetime will be spent outdoors. Not for all children, but for many children, they'll spend a lot of time outdoors. And this brings a new freedom and an opportunity to listen to God and notice God in the natural world. The child can experience the awe and wonder of God's creation, then they're more likely to engage with God as creator and to engage with their spirituality within the natural world. In all of this, though, it's important to remember that this isn't about initiating the child's relationship with God. That starts with God. That's not about us. That starts with God. But actually, maybe pointing out to those parents and adults in the home who are worried about engaging with faith at home because they don't feel equipped, that actually God's got this, might actually take off some of the pressure that they're feeling. And loving. Home is often the place where we develop our shared values and our attitudes. This Lawrence Richards quote sums that up. Where there's a love that communicates belonging, a respect that invites participation, a sharing that facilitates modelling, common activities that demand Christian interpretation of life, and a trust that encourages responsible choice, there's a relational context in which faith can be born and grow and flower. The family provides a unique place to model God's love and justice and forgiveness. And the safety of the family allows children to experiment, to question, to push at the boundaries, to try their feelings in different ways as they follow Jesus and they explore their relationship with God. The family is the place where we encourage children to show generosity, thankfulness, care, forgiveness, and where we notice it and name it and nurture it within that context. But as well as their attitudes, the loving nature of the 5 to 11-year-old can also be seen in their actions. And for a 5 to 11-year-old, their actions start to make sense of their faith. If you remember at the beginning, we talked about the fact that one of the key defining factors of a 5 to 11-year-old is that sense of right and wrong and justice and growing sense of conscience that is coming through this period. So enabling them to express their faith in actions and service builds on their holistic view of life, and it prevents there being a disconnect between their belief and practice and action. So encouraging children to choose something that they feel their faith stimulates them to explore, that they can commit to as a family group or as a couple of people within the family. And then crucially, encouraging them to talk together about what they learn from this experience, what they notice of God as they serve together and as they learn together. So children listen to each other and to God. They learn from experiences and others. They grow in relationship with others and God. And this love spills out into the world in an active way. And so the children listen and learn from their experiences, and so the cycle continues. But we're going to explore that a little more in a little while. For now, I think we're going to go to breakout rooms in a minute.
Thank you very much, Alison, for setting us off with so much food for thought. So yes, we're now going to spend a little bit of time in small groups in breakout rooms. We're going to have 10 minutes or so just to talk about what struck you from what Alison said, and perhaps anything from Jaden, hearing from Jaden at the start of the evening. And we'd also like to invite you in small groups to try and form 1 or 2 questions for the panel. So just make sure you've got someone in your group who's making a note of those questions, and he will post them into the chat as soon as you come back. We'll be coming back together at 7:50, but that will be a 10-minute break time. So as long as the person from your group with the questions has put those in the chat, you've then got a little bit of wriggle room, and we'll be regathering at 8 o'clock. But now we're going to have a bit of time in small groups. So welcome back, hopefully everyone, from a brief stretch or opportunity to grab a drink or a snack. I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague Lorraine Webb.
Thank you, Sam. It's an opportunity now for us to put some of your questions to our panel, and we have 3 guests with us on our panel tonight, and those are Alison, who's just been presenting her keynote for us. We have Pam Elliott, who works for Roots, and we have Leo Roberts, who is one of our children and youth development officers from Northwestern Synod. No, it is not. He's from Northern Synod.
No, I'm not. I'm from Northwestern Synod.
Oh, you are Northwestern. Sorry about that. So having a look at some of the questions, we've got 3 main questions there. So we're wondering, how can we help support our parents to find time to speak about God at home? And Pam, I think you were going to take this one for us.
Thank you, Lorraine. So I am actually the mother of a 6-year-old and 9-year-old, and I very much feel the pressure that everybody else is under at the moment with trying to fit everything in, not only just them being back at school, but all the clubs that we now desperately want them to be doing because they haven't had all those opportunities. And then there's all the other stuff that's going on, the homeworks, the seeing family, and it feels like a really pressurized time, and you can feel that maybe God's slipping through that as a faith family. And so it's really just bringing it into the everyday as much as possible, which I'm sure is a really obvious point. But just finding time to listen and to talk to the children in the activities that they're enjoying, or finding sort of ways through that will speak to them. We find seasonal activities and special occasions a really lovely way of bringing faith right into the home. We've been making pumpkins of hope. We're going to be doing our Advent windows. All these sorts of things that we're doing as part of our sort of wider church community are also things that we're sort of talking about at home a lot. But yeah, it's just finding that space and maybe allowing people not to feel too pressurized, because there's so many resources coming to people, that just allowing them to say it's fine to pick 1 or 2 things that work for you. As a leader, maybe if you have a WhatsApp group with the families, just maybe sharing 1 or 2 things you're doing, but not in a pressurized way that makes people feel that they have to be doing things. And really just saying, how can we support you? What are you finding hard? How can we help? Sometimes, like maybe the grandparents or other faith leaders can take more of a role in helping parents when they are feeling really pressurized in this situation.
I think as well, we heard earlier about it not being rocket science, that we can encourage parents to actually just be a little bit more confident about saying, I found God help me then, or I'm going to talk to God about that because that's worrying me. I think creates that atmosphere at home that doesn't actually need time, does it? It just means that you're throwing it into your normal everyday conversations.
And there was something that Alison said as part of her introduction, that it's about modeling, rather than doing faith with your children, be faithful with your children, let them see you being faithful and hope that they pick up that habit.
So Leo, Alison, how do we encourage parents who feel that they don't have the time or the skills in particular for doing faith at home?
I think there's a number of different strands to that. One is about modelling it, so that in a few moments I'm going to talk about physical space and visual space and auditory space. And it's really important when we're leading that we model that, so that when the parents see that happening, they go, oh, that's that. I'll try that at home. So modelling it's really important. There's again, when I was talking about Annie Beckwith before, she said, I've just been scurrying through her book, and she says what parents really want and desperately need are creative ways to care for the souls of their children. I'm not quite sure I like that sentence, but parents need something, because we expect things without going, oh, here's how you do it. Here's a thing. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But we need to be providing ways of doing so that parents who are going, I have no idea where to start, go, oh, this is where I start. But I think also as leaders, we have to be honest that, so if I give my community a faith at home thing to do, I've also got to go, do you know what? I didn't do that on Tuesday because I was just running around like a mad fool and I didn't do it. So I think there's got to be some honesty from us that we're not expecting them to be perfect and to do all of this, but just to find their way through. I think that's really, really key. And again, I'm going to talk in a few minutes about wondering questions, but I think they're kind of the linchpin, I think, for a lot of this, is just unlocking that we haven't, and none of us have got the answers. None of us are experts. We're all just muddling our way through. And these wondering questions help us to do that. And that's what I would say.
Thank you.
I think there's a real opportunity here for churches to link with parents as well. And it's so obvious, but it's so often that we don't do it, that we send our children home with a worksheet, or that they've made something out of cotton wool and candy sticks, but we haven't told the parents what they're doing. So we need to let our parents know what their children have been doing, so that they can ask questions and encourage them to ask questions and engage with what they've been doing. It's so important, but we don't do it enough.
Thank you. So Leo, we've been asked, are there any other resources that can be used for child faith development in the home, which will meet those children where they're at? So Jaden mentioned his podcast. Are there things like that families could use for their children that maybe don't always need the parents to lead the way?
I mean, there certainly are. There are podcasts galore. There are lots of television programs akin to CBBS and stuff like that, things like Story Keepers. And there's a cracking one by Tony Robinson, which is a few years old now, called The Land of Blood and Honey, which is Bible stories told in his inimitable way. I think the difficulty we have to, or the challenge we have to face, is that a 5-year-old is actually very different from an 11-year-old. And that whilst an 11-year-old might engage with a podcast, a 5-year-old won't, while a 5-year-old might engage with something like Story Keepers, an 11-year-old won't. And this is where we have to let parents know that they are the experts of their children, that they need to find the resource. And then there are lots of people that can help them find those resources. When we've got roots in the United Reformed Church, we've got the SIDO team. So there are people that can help them find that. But again, going back to something that Alison said, it's not babysitting. We're talking about faith development. You're not sitting them down in front of a cartoon that talks about God or tells a story from the Bible and just hopes that sort of via osmosis they pick something up. It's about engaging with them after they have engaged. And that does take time. And it does mean that we have to watch what they're going to watch or listen to what they're going to listen to make sure that it's suitable for their child, that it agrees with their understanding of theology and their understanding of the relationship with God. It's not just, if you just plonk them down in front of the telly or put the earphones on, then they may as well be listening to Black Sabbath and Game of Thrones, frankly.
Thank you, Leo. On that point, I'm going to hand over to Alison, who is going to take us on a little bit with our second keynote, some of the more practical aspects of faith with 5 to 11s.
Fabulous, thank you. I'll just share my screen again. So as I'm talking, bear in mind that a lot of this is about modelling this in the work that we're doing so that parents see how we do this. So practically, how we're going to unpack some of what I said earlier. We talked earlier about the need to create space where the children can be listened to and where they can listen and where they can explore and reflect in order to learn. Very often a child wants to create a physical space in order to do that because sometimes that exploration is something they don't want others to see. So it might be a den or a hiding place or a little nook in the garden where they go and create a space. In her blog, Prayer Stair, Karen Turner talks about she had one of those little half landings and there's a cupboard on it when they moved into a new house. And she gave her boys some paint and they painted the inside of the cupboard and filled it with prayer resources. And they began using this as a place for them to explore their faith. And when I say prayer resources, there were all kinds of randomness in there, but it meant something for them. And then they began to invite their parents to come with them into this space, and it became a family space where they met together. So sometimes it's simply providing the resource to create a space for them to explore in. It might be about creating visual space, a display of objects or things that allow the child to explore themselves. When my eldest was 6, his grandma, my mother-in-law, died. And he went up, when I told him, he went upstairs and gathered together a load of objects. So there was praying hands and a cross and Playmobil figures and a toy car and material. And he created this ark, and he sat in that ark while he processed what was going on for him. And he spent quite a long time there before he would then talk to me about what these objects were and why. And he invited me into that space in that way. But it was a space for him to reflect and be. But it might be something as simple as just an image that a child finds they can explore when they're looking at that particular image, a visual space for them. And what's key, as in both those examples, is that we're invited into the space. We don't just barge in. We wait as adults until we're invited into that space. It's also important to create auditory space. Rebecca and I talked about the 7-second rule, that when we've asked a question of a child, or when a child's finished speaking, we count for 7 seconds before we start to interrupt or prompt, because it might be they're just processing what they're going to say before they say it, and we need to allow that auditory space for that to happen. An auditory space is also about recognising the importance of silence to a 5 to 11-year-old. They are noisy and boisterous, but they also need some silence and some quiet and some prompts to listen or to reflect. The Roots at Home material often has prompts to listen or to pause or reflect. But I'm also fascinated by the kind of trends there are in children's small toys, things like poppets at the moment, and there were fidget spinners a while ago. But very often they are about a child sitting and being calm and being. Loom bands did the same thing a while ago as well. And actually that process of just being with the poppet and pressing it takes them into a place of silence and calm. And it might be that you add a repetitive prayer to that, so it becomes almost like prayer beads that you're using. But using some of these toys, these fidget toys that come out over time, to actually encourage the child to engage with their faith, using an everyday object when they're at home. And again, modelling it in our church environment so that when they get home, they try that out at home. So the importance of creating spaces. Listening to God can also be about pausing, and Pam alluded to this in her answer to the question, that life is busy and it's very scheduled for a 5 to 11-year-old. There's a lot of stuff packed into their lives. But actually, this is a good thing, because it means there are little places we can slot in a time to listen and learn from God. So it might be that on the way to school, a family are talking about their neighbourhood and maybe praying for people in that they meet, or blessing some of the shops they pass on their daily journey. It might be that at breakfast you have a simple morning prayer you share together, or that the day ends with the child reflecting on one thing they're thankful for, one thing that was hard that day, and something they might want to bring before God. Or at meal times, having on the table a jar where you write down or draw the ways you've been blessed that day, and you pop them into the jar on the table. Little simple things that are put into that schedule of the day that allow them to engage with their faith, to listen and learn from God in the busyness of their lives, building on the ordinary rhythms to create opportunities to listen and learn. And the God Venture blog, if any of you use that, has always got lots of little prompts on there for this kind of thing. We talked as well about the importance of the outdoors for this age group, and that outdoors they can create those special moments to stop and pause and notice the little things in nature. But it has to be child-led and be creative in that place. This is what Muddy Church is largely built on. Over the past couple of years, this has become quite a big thing for groups. But actually on the Muddy Church website, there are resources for families, things like the Jessie tree that they did last year, that build on that sense of small little noticing moments in the natural world where we engage with God and we listen and learn. The Roots at Home material very often has this kind of thing in, and there's an example there. And then a few years ago, the community that I'm part of did 16 amazing moments in God's amazing world. And this was 12 moments, one for each month, plus 4 extras. And there were simple things like looking for a carpet of bluebells, jumping in puddles, running in the wind, watching a sunrise or a sunset, going and playing in the snow. That was one of the extras because we couldn't guarantee when it was going to snow. But it was a very simple thing, and they had one thing each month, and each month we asked them how they got on with that. But the simple thing had a profound effect on their listening and learning from God, because it allowed those small noticing moments in nature where they engaged with God in a very real way. For some families, it will be about sitting down together for some kind of time of exploration together. And the Families on a Faith Adventure at Home material is ideal for exploring together as a family where your faith is and what you've been exploring, maybe in your church life or together at home. And just some pointers for some of that family time. Finding the time that works for that family. Even if somebody tells you, do this every Saturday morning or do this every day of the week, it's about finding a rhythm that works for that particular family, because only if you do that will it be sustainable. Helping parents to see that if you do sit down together to explore your faith together, it's not going to be quiet and reverential. There's going to be people running off, the doorbell's going to be ringing, the kettle's going to be boiling, and that's all okay. Being noisy and unstructured is fine. And being flexible to respond to what's going on in everyday life, what's going on in the outside world, and adapting over time as the children grow and develop. And this fourth one is really crucial, making sure it's a shared time, not an adult-led time. Rebecca Nine talks about the need for a spiritual level playing field. And a lot of her research has shown that when there isn't that spiritual level playing field at home, then children don't feel they can engage with their faith at home, because they feel they're being adult-led, they're being talked down to rather than being engaging as a wider group. So it's really key that we try to make it a level playing field. That when we're sitting down as a family together to explore any kind of devotional type material or anything like that, that it's about your family. So you do the activities that your family likes to do. If your family doesn't like craft, don't do craft. And that's why there's such a range of resources in the URC material, so you can pick the stuff you want to do. You don't have to do all of it. It's about choosing what works for my family so that actually we can engage in this exploration together. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. It's not a pass or fail. Try something else. Work out what works for your family and go with that. We talked a bit about recapping the day a moment ago. And as Pam said earlier, using the seasons of the years as markers, as points in the year to go, oh, let's engage with faith in a different way at this point in time. So using some of those different ways as a family, if you're sitting down together. But remembering for the adults in the home and for us as leaders, if we're providing material to explore at home, it's crucial to recognise that this isn't a teaching model, but it's a mutual sharing as we listen and learn together. And we touched on this in the questions, but for many adults who are unsure about their own faith, or they feel ill-equipped to support their child in their faith, we need to provide things to support them. It might be a simple Advent candle liturgy as we go into Advent that they do together each week. It might be signposting them to something like Guardians of Ancora, where they can explore online together. It might be something like the Baking Through Lent that's been appearing on a lot of Facebook pages over the past couple of years, or something like the Lent Garden of Response that was in the Roots at Home material last year. But providing different resources. And again, the Families on a Faith Adventure provides those resources and responds to the season. So at the moment, there's just been a lot of material responding to the fact that we're in Halloween. So responding to what's happening at that particular point in time and providing resources that an adult can pick up and go, oh, yeah, I can do that. I can do that bit. And actually, let's explore this our faith together in this way. But if you do nothing else, I would, as I alluded to earlier, introduce I wonder questions. Because asking wondering questions doesn't require you to be an expert, and it doesn't even require you to know the answers to the questions. These are the basic I wonder questions that are used in godly play. But once you get into the habit of using wondering questions, they start to come up all the time. You start to wonder about everything as you explore your faith together. So actually for adults, if there's nothing else we do to unlock that ability to explore faith with their children by using wondering questions, would be a great way forward. And loving. We talked about the importance to these children of their strong sense of justice and right and wrong and doing something to support and help others. That will come out in their attitudes and in their actions. So providing things that support that, whether it be a random act of Christmas kindness or Thanktober, like the God Venture have just been promoting, or whether it be in their actions by maybe collecting for a food bank, But actually, if we do something as simple as a shoebox appeal or collecting for a food bank and allow the children to talk about why we're doing that, and what it is that stimulates us to do that, and what will happen as a result of what we do, then actually their actions become part and parcel of their everyday faith, of their living faith, as they go on to follow these. We're currently in the middle of COP26, and in the community I'm part of, we've been exploring the COP26 challenges that Roots have put out. They put out 12, we just used 10 because that worked for us, and we are putting them on WhatsApp each night to get families to talk around the meal table about what they can do to make a difference in the climate crisis. So engaging children in action, providing them with a framework that is coming from their faith is vital. So that, as I said earlier, children listen to each other and to God. They learn from their experience and from others. They grow in relationship with others and with God. And this love spills out into the world in an active way as their living faith develops and grows. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alison. You've given us lots of food for thought there, and so many practical ideas and pointers to help people get started, either themselves or in supporting and encouraging others, as you were saying. So we're now going to go back into the small groups that we were in earlier. We've got, I think, about 15 minutes now. And really, this is a time to encourage one another to think about the roles that you're in as parents, grandparents, supporters of others who are parents or grandparents, or in your children's work in church, and think about what you're going to take from today, how you're going to apply this yourself, or what you're going to try and enable and encourage other people to start thinking about. Welcome back, everyone. I hope the conversations in your breakout rooms were as stimulating as the one that I was had the privilege to be part of in my breakout room. I'm delighted now to be handing over to Leo, who's just going to give us a little bit of reflection on the evening so far and his thoughts.
Thanks very much, Sam. And it's been an interesting evening, and an evening in which I've learned, and I hope that you've learned too. I think one of the things that struck me most, I was really interested to watch the video of Jaden, and he kept using all the time the word learning. Now, it might be his vocabulary, because when we talk about learning, we also automatically think that somebody is teaching. But what came very clear from what Alison was saying is that it's not teaching somebody, it's experiencing and discovering with. That is where real development takes place, to be alongside and to model what is being done and what you're talking about. There's no point saying that God loves everybody if you're then not being nice at home. You've got to model those loving, caring and listening relationships. Why listen to your child if you're not going to listen to your partner? The other thing I think that struck me and really gave me pause for thought when we started saying it was this idea of almost timetabling, of making a specific time. Now, I think Alison called it rhythm. Now, as a musician and as a Roman Catholic, rhythm is really important to me. So I liked that idea. But then I thought, no, actually, because then you're pigeonholing what you are doing. You know, you're setting up something. So God is here, and then after we finish this, we can forget about God. But of course, the idea of starting that activity, setting that rhythm, is that it then blossoms and flows throughout everything that you do in your day. You might need to start somewhere, but having started, you can allow it to develop, you can allow it to grow, you can allow it to work through the whole family, and which of course is the extended family. It's not just the people that live in the home. It's grandparents, it's friends, it's church members. And I think we need to be careful that we remember, in our group, we were talking about the dangers and difficulties of Halloween. And we have to accept that whilst we have particular insights into days of the week, and Alison was talking about seasons, our children are living in a society, and that society celebrates Halloween. That society celebrates Guy Fawkes. That society goes to school. That society likes making money. All the things that we perhaps as Christians might say, well, there is a place for that, but how do we respond to that with our children? It's about recognizing that faith development is a very small but significant part of the development of our children and young people. Our children 5 to 11s, all the growing that they do then, it's not just about faith. It's about learning to read. It's about learning to write. It's about arithmetic. It's about developing relationships with other people. Alison was talking about the 5 to 11s and their input into conscience and justice development. And very often when we talk with our children about God, we start from the God viewpoint. This is what God says about the environment. This is what God says about justice. What do you think? And I think that we go about that the wrong way around. We should be asking our children, what is it that you care about? What is it that is important to you in your life? And having listened and heard what is important to them, that's the time to bring, well, I wonder how we can explore that. I wonder what God, I wonder what the Bible, I wonder what Jesus had to say about those sort of things. Enabling children to see that God is relevant to their lives, not the other way around. They are relevant to God's lives. There's so much that we've heard and so much that we've learned today. I'd like to sort of finish with a thought, really. Some of you will have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the very basic one is food and shelter and warmth, and then it goes up and up and up to self-actualization. And that faith development, that knowing who you are and knowing your relationship with God is right at the very tip of that pyramid. Is the church only responsible for that bit? Or does the church also have responsibility for all the other stages before it as well? Are we there to look after our children in all their needs, not just their spiritual needs? And if it's true, as I believe it is, then what aren't we doing for our children? What opportunities are we missing out to share God's love with them by being practical and by being there? Here endeth.
Thank you very much, Leo. We're now going to hear a little from Roots about some of the resources that they offer.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam. There we go. Hope you can see all that. So Alison has mentioned the fairly new resource that we've been offering at Roots called Roots at Home. And I just wanted to take you through that a little bit more. We've seen some snippets from it. It's a PDF that is specially written every week and appears on our website in our Faith 24 section. And it's written and intended to be used in households of any shape, size, age range. Any combination of adults and children can use this in small groups all together. You could do it on your own if really wanted to, but it is intended for intergenerational use. It's always based on a Bible passage. It's the passage that the weekly resources have been focusing on, but it stands completely alone and has been written specially with households in mind and what might be at home. So there's a Bible reference with a little brief summary. There's a note on the passage, drawing perhaps something of a particular note out of it, and a question to ponder. Then on the second page, there's an attractive storybook presentation that you could use with children. There are little notes to help understanding of biblical vocabulary and language. The children's storybook version is as close to the NRSV as we feel is useful. I mean, we might just slightly rewrite really complicated grammar, but we don't take the language out of it because it's really important for biblical literacy to understand that. We also do give the NRSV Bible text. So every week we produce this resource, and it helps everyone to explore the Bible, to love God, and to grow in faith together. There's a range of activities to suit all learning styles and all spiritual preferences, whether children need to be, or adults need to be, perhaps more quiet and reflective, serving each other, getting out and about to do things, using puzzles, words, language to explore things. There's a huge range provided here, so something will always engage. When the activities are done together, they can be done anytime, anyone could choose what they feel drawn to. Then people will in these groups have a shared experience. They'll create memories together. That should help their relationships to flourish and to faith to grow there together. The activities might be inside, they might take you outside, as Alison drew our attention to earlier on. They can be creative with making, baking, painting. They can be reflective with perhaps looking at objects, finding objects, considering an image of some sort, holding silence, prayer. Or they could be very active about going out to help and support other people. And there's also an opportunity to develop holy habits, to create spaces for prayer and reflection all the time. Alongside that, we do have an activity sheet, which you may be familiar with as well, that can be used in various ways, but it would complement the Roots at Home resource with a bit of colouring, other types of activities where we're drawing, writing, simple things like that. So together, that would give quite a strong offering to households. The Roots at Home sheet and resource, as I say, is on the website. And so it's available to subscribers to email out to people, to print out and hand out, to put on the website with a link, to message with a link. And we would just encourage you to share that and ask households to engage with it and use it as and when they feel it's appropriate. It's a good way for you as leaders to keep in touch with families if they can't come, perhaps into churches or groups, or they've had a bit of a break, or it's the summer break. Then it means that you have a reason for keeping in touch. And they can create a community amongst themselves by perhaps sharing photographs or saying where they've been doing things and sharing out how they've been reacting and which activities they found appealing. The Roots at Home resource and the activity sheet are available to all subscribers. And our subscriptions, say for a team of leaders, start at as little as £104 a year for 5 website logins, which would make that at sort of about £2 per month per user. And don't forget, you're actually getting an awful lot more for your money than just the Roots at Home resource. You could resource many other things. So perhaps have a little look if you don't know that part of Roots. Do get in touch with us and see where that can take you and your families on their other adventures at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. It's good to see some of those lovely resources that you're producing there at Roots. I know I've used some of them myself and find them really useful. We come now to a time of worship. I'd like you, if you can, to have a piece of paper and a pencil or something to write with. If not, don't worry, you can use the resource that I have on PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Each evening I've been asked to lead worship. So I've taken the themes of loving and listening and learning, and tonight I thought we would focus on loving. we're going to share together in reading 1 Corinthians 13 in a slightly different format. I'm going to read the words in ordinary type. If you will join with the words in bold type, and I'm going to, despite the cacophony, I'm going to invite you to unmute and ask you to put some welly in. 1 Corinthians 13. I am a good person.
So
I can speak in different languages.
what?
I can speak God's words into the world.
So what?
I can understand all God's secret messages. I can pray, believing miracles can happen.
What?
I can feed the poor.
So what?
If I do all these things, but don't love people,
Then it's
Pointless.
what is love?
Love.
Love is
patient.
Love is
kind.
Is love jealous?
No.
Is love boasting?
No.
Is love angry?
No.
Is love rude?
No.
Is love selfish?
No.
Does love trust?
Yes.
Does love hope?
Yes.
Is love strong?
Yes.
Does love end?
No.
On your piece of paper, if you have one, I'd like you to draw a circle. Into that circle, I'd like you to draw or name the people and children who are close to you, the ones that you know and love and care about. If you have no paper or pen, just think about those people. Look at the illustration on the screen and imagine those little play people. Who could they represent for you? For the first part of our prayer, I would like you just to touch with your finger each of the names or drawings or each of the little play people on the screen, thinking about those people that you want to pray for. Let's pray together. Loving parent God, we bring to you all those that we love and all those that love us. Help us to be forgiving and trusting. Help us try not to get jealous or irritable or selfish, but instead help us to love like you love. Now for the second part of our prayer, Use your finger to trace the circle around those people. Loving parent God, thank you for your love, which is so big and so amazing that it includes every single person and every single thing that you have created. Thank you that you love us even when we don't deserve that love. Help us to love you in return, to love each other and to love ourselves just as you love us. And now give yourself a big hug as we say together, Amen. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our time together this evening. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your evening with us. I hope that you found this stimulating and inspiring, and we look forward to seeing many of you again on Thursday night or next Tuesday night for the following 2 sessions in this series on living faith with 5s to 11s. Go well, stay safe. You'll get an email from us probably in about a week or so with a link to this session as a video. So if you want to share it more widely with other volunteers in your team or parents even directly, then feel free to do that. But thank you so much for coming and being with us this evening. Go well, take care.